What would you do if you woke up to find a dead man in your bed? Welcome to the depths. Hello, welcome to Reading from the Depths. My name is Lecton. Thank you for spending some time with me today. I have a review for you today of I Might Be in Trouble by Daniel Aleman. This is being published in the beginning of December, and I received a complimentary copy in exchange for an honest review. Now, this is a dark comedy, the premise of which is our main character is a young, struggling author. He wakes up one morning after having a great internet hookup the night before, and he finds that his hookup is dead in his bed, and he has to figure out what to do. And things kind of escalate from there. The story is really fun, actually. The main character is young, and he is an author, and he had great success when he was 22, I think. He had a debut novel that everyone loved. And then he wrote a follow up, and no one liked it at all. And so now he's struggling to write his third novel, and he has a pitch for it, and it's just not going well, right? It is not, he's a mess. And he can't live up to the expectations that he has of himself or that it seems everyone else has. He's trying to please everyone, and in the process, he's pleasing no one. So, as I said, he is a mess, and then his boyfriend leaves him because he is too difficult to live with, right? So his boyfriend, who still cares for him, says, I can't be with you anymore. So now he's newly single, he's depressed, he is under all this pressure, and he starts hooking up with all these guys that he meets on the internet, and he ends up with a dead guy in his bed. And what does he do? Instead of calling the police, he calls his agent. And so his agent decides, you know what? We can dispose of the body ourselves. No one has to know. And everything kind of goes downhill from there. There's a very kind of tongue in cheek meta aspect to the story. You know, the author is named Daniel. The main character is an author named David, who ends up writing a novel about an author who's named Daniel. So there is this kind of meta level of analysis going on that I think is a type of introspection that is really interesting and is very playful. The story itself is fun, it is suspenseful, even though, you know, there's a literal corpse in the room with you for most of the story. It doesn't feel heavy. So it's this comedy of errors feeling almost. And I think it's an appropriate tone when dealing with this kind of dark material because the point of the story isn't about this dead person. The point is about understanding who you are and understanding who the main character is and what it means to live under the expectations of the world around him and what it means to do so in a way that is honest to yourself. So the premise itself of having this internet hookup who's now dead in your bed, and then finding out more about him as the story progresses, that he is not who he pretended to be either. That is just kind of fertile ground for something else to grow. That's not the point of the story. That's just the circumstances that let the story take place. So it is very darkly funny. The situations seem very, some of them seem quite realistic. Sometimes you push credulity a little bit. There's only so many weekend at Bernie's kind of shenanigans you can get up to with a corpse and feel like they're really happening. But in general, it feels genuine. The world building is actually done really well. It is the sense of claustrophobia that comes from fame. It comes from pressure. It comes from having a non-supportive family. You know, comes from feeling isolated, from not having friends. And not having friends because you don't put yourself out there. It isn't that our main character is not likable. It's that he is so focused on himself that he doesn't allow himself to be in relationship with others in a meaningful way, right? And so that feels very small, even though it takes place in a big city. It feels small. It feels isolating. And I think the author does a really good job of building that world around our character. I think something that goes a long way for the story and also for the world is that the dialogue is all really convincing, even in these kind of ludicrous circumstances. It feels genuine. And so that dialogue helps bring you into the story and it makes it feel more real. Now, the writing I thought was really strong. I thought the portrayal of this character was really exciting and it felt compelling to me. I did think that the pacing got off a little bit by the third act. I think by the time we get to the third act, there we're finding more and more revelations about who his internet hookup was and what it means to try to get rid of this body and what lengths they have to go through. And things start happening and decisions start being made that feel like our main character has lost agency, that things are just happening to him. And that is less exciting for me. So the last third of the book feels like our main character is being dragged along through it instead of making choices through it. Whereas up until now, he was the one making choices. And they weren't good choices. And he was relying on others' help to decide what choices to make sometimes. But he was still active. And by the end, it feels like he's being pulled along and not pulled along by the circumstances, right? That's part of this style of story. When you make the decision up front to hide a dead body, then things kind of fall downhill and you are stuck with that inertia. So that makes sense. That kind of being pulled along makes sense. but it just feels like his choices cease to be his own, including some really self-destructive decisions that he makes as the story progresses in that last act. So I thought the story itself in the last act, what happened, all the events of the narrative, I like that a lot. I just think the pacing and the way the character existed in that last act didn't match with the first 2/3 of the book. And so it fell off a little bit for me, but not so much that it hindered my enjoyment of the novel. At that point, I was invested. At that point, I really cared about this character because I think the character is really well realized. He feels like a genuine, real person. He is a desperate mess of emotions, right? And it feels like everything is happening all around him, to him, but it's really his indecision and his inability to make firm decisions about who he wants to be that are allowing all these things to happen around him. Now, there are a number of ancillary characters, his ex-boyfriend, his dates, his agent, and they are less well developed than he is. And to some extent, they almost feel like stereotypes insofar as each of them is playing off different neuroses that he has. So they're all acting as foils to the main character in some way. And I think that's actually useful. So even though they aren't incredibly well developed as ancillary characters, they're developed enough that they don't feel like cardboard cutouts. They feel like they have a role in this narrative and in our main character's life. And so much of his difficulty is his kind of solipsism, that he's so focused on himself and how things are going to affect him, that having the other main characters fit into these roles as participating in his life in a certain way, but not being fully well-rounded characters makes sense, because that is how our main character sees the world around him, right? He's focused on his own troubles at the expense of everyone else around him. So the story itself is fun. Like I said, it's dark, it's mysterious, there's some suspense. To be honest, the twists and turns aren't that unpredictable. You can guess what's going to happen. It isn't going to knock your socks off when you get to the end. You can guess a lot of the things before they happen. However, it never feels bland. It never feels unearned. Everything makes sense in this style of story because this isn't supposed to be a suspense story. This isn't a thriller or a mystery. This is a dark comedy that's using the trappings of a thriller or a suspense or a mystery story to talk about something else. And the mystery itself is compelling enough, even if it is somewhat expected, that it pulls you along. It never feels like an afterthought. This kind of the suspense and the thriller aspects of it are an important part of the narrative. So they never feel like they're just tacked on at the end, but they aren't the main part of the narrative. I think the main part of the narrative is this question about what it means to be performing your life instead of living your life. What it means to have such a lack of understanding of who you are in the world, or a fear of understanding who you are in the world, that you can't relate to others in any sort of genuine or meaningful way. And those brief moments of connection that you have become some things that you grasp onto, but you aren't able to replicate because you're looking outside of yourself for validation instead of looking inside, instead of discovering who you are and how you want to be in the world and what is important to you. Instead, you're looking at what mask you need to put on to impress others. And that's what our main character is doing. He's living his life as a performance, and he laments it. He knows he's doing it, but he also can't understand another way to be, which goes to another level, as I was saying, about this kind of tongue-in-cheek meta aspect of an author writing a book about an author writing a book about an author who writes a book about an author, and the author's names kind of cycle back and forth between the actual author of the book, Daniel, writing about David, who's writing about Daniel. You see this buildup of layer upon layer upon layer of what it means to always be presenting something to the world that isn't who you understand yourself to be. And part of that's because you don't know who you are. In the story, the thriller and mystery aspects, the, comedy of errors of navigating what to do with a corpse who then ends up having his own secrets, all of that is just a way to understand what it means to be yourself, what it means to navigate fame as well as pressure, as well as, community around you, what it means to find solace in friends and in companionship, and what it means to be honest about yourself. So the heart of this story is this inner journey that our main character goes on, and all of the external trappings are just plot devices for him to go on this journey. And ultimately, that inner journey is satisfying. I do feel like, as I mentioned, the third act, some of the revelations that our character has about himself come up really suddenly. And that's due to, I think, the third act not being as well paced as the first two acts. However, it doesn't feel unearned. It feels like they come really quickly, but they do feel across the breadth of the whole novel like where he ends up is deserved, and it isn't unexpected. And so I'm able to forgive the kind of sudden nature of that third act being so lethargic, and where he loses agency only for things to kind of happen right at the end that give him that agency back. I think over the arc of the story, it makes sense. Ultimately, the story is giving you a chance to look at yourself and trying to discover who you are in the face of chaos. Chaos that is outside of your control and chaos that you have a hand in creating. What does it mean to know yourself when everything else around you is in flux? And then with that knowledge, how can you affect those around you? I do have to say though, I'm talking about it in very serious tones. The story is quite funny. Very darkly funny, but it is funny. The decisions they make and then the situations they find themselves in as a result of these decisions are quite comedic, and they have me chuckling throughout the story. So I had a lot of fun with the story. I kind of didn't expect to have a lot of fun with it. I thought the setup seemed a little bit simple when I read it, but then I got into it, and right away I felt that it had a lot more to share and a lot more to give than the simple premise kind of lets on. So I had a great time with it, and I hope you get a chance to read it too if it sounds interesting to you. I think for now that's all I have. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments if you've read this or if you're interested in it. For now, thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.